Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Data Secrets of Successful Marketers webinar. We're just going to give it a few more seconds while we wait for a few more people to join us, and then we'll kick things off. All right, let's get started. So again, thank you for joining us today. For the next 45 minutes, we are going to spill some secrets, specifically the secrets behind the data-driven practices of the most and the least successful marketers today based on Zeotap's recent industry research. Hello, my name is Zulay, and I am the Content Communications Manager at Zeotap. And today I am joined by Hannah, Zeotap's VP of Marketing, and JC, our CSM Director. Now you'll hear from both of them very shortly, but before that, the agenda. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's do a quick run through. First, we'll walk through the current landscape of data discipline and the challenges marketers have faced over the last year that have led them to where we are today. Based on our research, we're going to introduce you to the 5 distinct success marketing archetypes, the tech stacks they use to manage their data. We're going to look at how a marketer's confidence in data privacy compliance correlates with their level of success, otherwise known as the law. We'll look at how marketers today are using machine learning to turn their data into insight. And finally, we will unveil the final verdict and look at who's winning and who's falling behind in the race to become a data-driven function. Now, to help you get the most out of this session, let's cover a few housekeeping points. First, questions. On the right-hand screen, left to right, not sure how it's mirroring, you will see some tabs. One of these is labeled questions, and this is where you'll want to submit yours throughout the presentation. We'll have about 10 minutes at the end to go over as many questions as we can, so be sure to submit yours early. If you have any technical issues or have questions about the session, submit your questions via the chat tab, and we'll try to help you as quickly as possible. And lastly, we will be sending a recording of the session after this, so be sure to check your inbox so you can recap or share the session if you found it useful. Now, for anyone who's unsure of who Zeotap is, we are a customer data platform made in and for Europe. We help companies harness the power of their first-party data, first by unifying their data across multiple silos via online and offline resources to create a single customer view or golden record of data. We then enhance that data with machine learning models and lookalike audience creation. And this enables our clients to then activate that data across multiple different channels and platforms. Lastly, and most importantly, because we live in a privacy-first world, one important detail to note is our level of compliance. Every aspect of our first-party data asset is compliant across different consent requirements and user consent preferences. Now, with that intro out of the way, let's talk secrets. Now, the research you'll see throughout this session is based on a survey of 500 senior marketers in the UK with the aim of showing how different data practices correlate with overall marketing success. To measure this success, the respondents were initially asked how far above or below they've achieved on their 2021 targets. And according to their attainment, they were sorted into 5 distinct marketing archetypes. Now, I'm going to pass the mic over to Hannah, who will walk us through the current landscape to understand how we've gotten to this point and then introduce you to these archetypes. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you very much, Zulay. Yes, so before we dive into meeting all of our different archetypes, let's set the scene a little bit. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the last 2 years have been kind of weird in marketing, and that has had a huge impact on data discipline and all of the other data challenges that we've seen today and what we're going to see later on. So these are the first 3 that I'm going to talk about. So COVID has had a huge impact across marketing as a whole, namely, first of all, budget cuts. Second of all, giving us unpredictability in what we were doing day to day. And third, just causing disruption to how we work. Data discipline is one of those ways of working that demands being agile, that demands being collaborative. All of a sudden, over the last year, when we all suddenly went to work from home, this was a huge amount of disruption to all of those long-term projects. So those 3 things that came out of COVID have really created chaotic space for marketers who've been trying to progress in creating a data first department. But there's also been something else on the side as well, which is my fourth point here, data privacy. This is not the last time that you're going to hear about that in the course of the next 45 minutes. But of course, regulations like GDPR, which we're all familiar with, CCPA, e-privacy, these kind of regulations are springing up left, right, and center, and there seems to be a new one every month. For many marketers, that is something that is an extra challenge that gets added to trying to become a data-first organization. So all of these things combined could stack the odds against us as marketers in trying to become a data-driven discipline, but not for all of us. And so that's why we're going to meet our different archetypes of marketing success. And we will explore each of these as we go through the rest of the research to see how they differ across these different indexes. So let's start at the top, and we're going to meet the top 1%. So these are our most successful marketers sitting at the top of the tree. And by successful, we mean that they achieved from about 70 to 100% above target. So in other words, they smashed it in the last year. Now, we'll see much more about them later on, but what we can take from the very beginning is that these guys are data-driven by definition. That goes across the whole gamut of what that means, from how they're managing data privacy, to how they're preparing for a cookieless future, to actually having a single customer view in the first place. These guys have got it on lock, and a great example to follow. But they're not by any means the ones doing well here. So we'll move on to our next archetype, who are sitting at one rung below. These are the overachievers. So still have done very well. 30 to 60% above target is what they got to in the last year. And we also see that these guys are also getting towards being data-driven. They're quite confident in what they're doing with their customer data strategies. And even if they don't have a single customer view, and we'll talk about that more later, they're using lots of different data sources in order to try and compensate for that. So while they might not be at the end of that journey, they are certainly progressing very, very far towards it. So that was our second rung. Let's move on to our third. Those guys that sat directly in the middle, the moderate marketer. So they achieved their target, or they exceeded it by up to 20% last year, which means that, you know, they've got data-driven enough to meet their overall goals, but they do have some way to go at the same time. And we'll explore what exactly that means as we go through. So that's our layer in the middle. Let's get into the slightly less successful marketers. So our struggling marketer, the guys who achieve between 10 to 50% below target. And you can see this reflected in what their data practices are like. They're not entirely confident in their customer data strategy. They might not be using loads of sources. They might have a single customer view, but that's a bit of a stretch at the same time. There's some interesting stuff to unpick later on about data privacy here, no spoilers. But these guys have certainly got a way to go in terms of their journey. Let's hope to see them make lots of progress next year. And then last, but also kind of least, is the bottom tier marketer. So these guys achieved 60 to 100% below target or lower in the last year. And once again, we can see a correlation here between their level of success or lack thereof and their data practices. So they're lacking diversity in their addressability strategy. They're lacking confidence in their strategy as well. Once again, there's an interesting point about data privacy that we'll come to later on. But what we're going to see here again is these guys being the ones that have the furthest to go in becoming a data-driven organization. So I don't know if you guys want to volunteer in the chat as to which archetype you fall into. No judgment. This is a safe space. Do tell us. But these are our 5 archetypes. We're going to return to these guys throughout the course of the next few minutes and understand how all of these differences reflect in the different areas of being a data-driven marketer. All right, so we've got 4 different sections to go through today. We're going to start with the foundations. So the foundations of being a data-driven organization can be kind of translated to one big important thing, and that is a single customer view. So that is a golden record, if you've heard that terminology as well. In other words, being able to bring all of your data on your customers from the disparate sources and the disparate taxonomies in which it probably exists right now, perhaps in different teams across different kinds of technologies and data warehouses, and bring them into one. unified into one clear golden record of the customer. That is the baseline that you really need in order to become a data-driven organization. So this is where we started with asking our respondents. And the line was pretty clear here. So as you can see, that green line is the yes to do you have a single customer view. And the top 1% have nailed it. They've all got one, which is remarkable. But as we can see, the less successful we get, the lower down that line goes. So there's an immediate correlation here between the idea of overall marketing success and having a single customer view. And we'll end up coming back to this a couple of times across the course of the next few minutes, because this is a really important fundamental. And without this, it's very hard to do all of those other things that make us a data-driven organization, like machine learning, like having consent and privacy on lock. It all comes back to this. In many ways, not a huge surprise that success is correlated against a single customer view. But the next thing was a bit more of a surprise. So we asked all of those marketers who don't have a single customer view right now, when are you going to have one? And this is where the answers were kind of shocking. In other words, the single customer view will be near universal by the end of next year, by the middle of next year, and almost completely 99.9% universal by the end of 2022. So this is what it showed. Basically, everyone who is saying green is expecting to do it in the next 6 to 12 months. Now, that is a remarkable ambition. As many of us will probably know, bringing together a single customer view is not an easy undertaking. It involves getting together many different areas of the business. It involves having the right technology. It involves being able to use that kind of right technology as well, and then making it all work in practice. So the fact that we have even the struggling marketers and even the bottom tier marketers who are arguably the least data-driven, having a very clear, very big ambition for the end of next year says an awful lot about the kind of progress we can expect to see as we come out of COVID, as life returns to normal. This is the reflection that's going to be seen when it comes to marketing practices. So that's big news at the end of the day, but let's see what's happening in the meantime. Because one of the other questions that we wanted to find out was, okay, we know that quite a few of us don't have a single customer view right now. So what are we doing instead? So we asked all of our respondents, if you don't have that single customer view, how many different data sources are you working with day to day? And we wanted to see whether or not that correlated with success. And the outtake was kind of pretty much does. The more successful you are up towards that overachiever side, the more likely you are to be using multiple different sources of data. And it's at this point that I'm going to hand over to JC to tell us a little bit more about why we think that is.
Hi, Hannah. Thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, from the experience that I've had in the CDP world, more sources does actually mean more success. But generally, I think that a lot of people do put this correlation of that if you have more sources, you're generally going to be more successful. And that's not the case, because if you have a look at, for example, the bottom tier market is there, 50% of them have 11 to 15 sources coming in, which is quite a lot of sources coming in. But the problem that they've got, and the reason that they're bottom tier marketers at the moment, is that they don't have the way to actually unify all of that data into one central repository. So if you have a look at the overachievers or the moderate marketers that have 16 to 20 sources coming in, and also all the other sources that they've got coming in, this is a correlation of they must be able to organize those sources and organize that data in a way that they can actually use it and action it at a later stage. What you're probably seeing with the struggling marketers and the bottom tier marketers is that although they do have a lot of sources coming in, they've got no way to actually unify them and make them actionable so that their campaigns can run a lot better. So sometimes, yes, more data sources equals more success. And I mean, to be honest, if you have more data coming in, you've got more of a chance to actually reach people on a different level. But you also have to have those data sources organized and orchestrated in the right way so that they can be useful and efficient for the campaigns that you're actually running out.
Couldn't agree more. And that segues really neatly onto what we're going to cover next. So thank you, JC, which is the stack. So if we need to try and create that single customer view and be able to work with all of that data, what kind of tools are we getting in place in order to do that? So that was our next set of questions. And what we found was another correlation with success. and that correlation is with CDP usage. So CDPs, customer data platforms, are the green line that you can see represented here. So the more successful the marketer, going from bottom to top, the higher that green line goes. So once again, kind of correlating with the idea of the single customer view, the more successful the marketer, the more likely they are to have a CDP, because that's exactly what a CDP does. On the inverse was the idea of the DMP. So data management platforms, unlike the CDP, are actually going down with the more successful marketers. There's a real transition here that seems to be happening. And once again, I'm going to kick this over to JC, who can tell us a bit more about why.
Yeah, sure. In the environment that we're in at the moment, customers and generally people that navigate online or on apps or anything like that want to do things in real time. So if they don't look for if they don't find something straight away that they're interested in, they will move on to another thing. Now, this is what CDPs address and what DMPs can't address at the moment. So what we have with CDPs is that we can pull in all the different data sources in real time, organize them in real time, and then action them in real time, which means that it gives you and gives companies a better chance to actually action and reach the relevant people within their actual business with the relevant campaigns that can be efficient. Now, a DMP just doesn't have this. You'll always have a time to market which will be a lot longer than what you could be able to do with a CDP. Hence why in the marketing world that we live in, the very real-time marketing world that we live in at the moment, a CDP is a better option rather than a DMP. So I think this is where the previous graph that we looked at, you'll see the top 1%, most of those will probably have a first-party CDP strategy as opposed to a DMP third-party strategy.
And I think we'll come back to that when we talk cookieless future in just a minute, actually, very pertinent. But let's move on to the next slide, actually. I'm going to keep you with me because there are so many different kinds of technology that claim to be able to help us manage data and become a data-first organization that I think it can probably be overwhelming. So we looked at some of these other types of tech as well. So data warehouses, marketing automation platforms, CRMs as well, and tried to look at how those correlate with different ideas of success. And what was interesting here was that, we saw that CDPs increase the more successful the marketer is, but generally it doesn't mean a decrease in these other forms of technology. It didn't mean a drop in CRMs. It didn't mean a drop in data warehouses either, which you might take as surprising because you would think that one really replaces the other. But JC, I know that you've got some insight on that as well as to why that might not be the case.
I do. And the reason that it's not the case is that a CDP is not a silver bullet. So if your company thinks that by contracting a CDP, it's going to solve all of your problems, all of your data problems and everything else, it's not. You still have to use a CDP in conjunction with other platforms that give you other services. So for example, if you have a look at this, a marketing automation platform is very, very important for a marketer to be able to use it. Now, what a CDP does is it gives you the fresh, orchestrated and organized and consent managed data to be able to then push it to these marketing automation platforms. So what we're looking at here is the CDP being the central repository for all the data that's coming in and then feeding all the other platforms that are within your tech stack. So if you have another look here, you have the central repository, and a lot of companies, what they do need is a final repository for your data. So hence why the data warehouse, an enterprise data warehouse or a data warehouse would be top of the list, because most companies need to have their data in one place as a final resting place. Okay. Now, what we're seeing here is that obviously the CRM is going down. Why? Because a lot of the things that we're doing within a CRM, you can actually do within a CDP as well. So what we're doing is we're organizing a lot of different audiences and segments to be able to then push them onto the marketing automation platform. And then those platforms will then connect, the CDP will then connect with other platforms like your analytics platforms or any other tech stack that you have within there that needs data to be fed into it. So this is why you see this direct correlation between different platforms being used regularly by clients as well as a CDP, which is basically a complementary to that.
Awesome, thank you. So the next part of this little conversation about the Slack might seem like a bit of a segue, but there's a reason for it. So a lot of what we talked about when it's come to use of data so far is showing that there's a correlation between building a really strong first-party data set and success. Now, one of the reasons why people are looking to build a really strong first-party data set is because in just shy of 2 years, third-party cookies are going to disappear. And this is where we go to the term cookieless future. And if you're not sick of this term already, I'm sure you will be by the end of 2023. So we asked our respondents, what are you planning to do in order to ensure that you've got addressability once those third-party cookies go away? And what we were expecting to find was reflected here, that the more successful the marketer, the more that they're doing in terms of building that first-party asset, using things like universal IDs in order to be able to make that work across the programmatic ecosystem. But what we also found was an interesting anomaly in our bottom tier marketers. So you can see that there's one line that spikes, and that line is cohort-based advertising. So most of us here will be familiar with FLOC, which is Google's idea of this. And there is something quite clear in the less successful the marketer, the more likely you are to be putting all of your eggs in one basket when it comes to maintaining addressability in the cookieless future. And there's a reason why that could be a big mistake. Ultimately, all of these solutions are very, very different. There is no one silver bullet. There is no one catch-all solution that's going to fix everything. So it's really important to ensure that you have a diversity of different solutions in order to meet all of your needs. So to put all of your eggs in one basket, as we've got here, could be shooting yourself in the foot when it comes to addressability in just short of 2 years' time. So that was a quick segue onto the cookieless future, because you can't go through a MarTech presentation without missing it. So there you go. So let's move it on now to the even more fun part, which is the law, which I'm sure everyone has been dying to hear about. So this is where we were asking our respondents about compliance when it comes to their use of first-party data, when it comes to their use of customer data at all. And we focused here on whether or not they're confident. So we asked all of our marketers, how confident are you that you're complying with privacy rules and how you collect and manage data? And this is where things were once again very surprising. So everything in blue, everything in green is indicating confidence. Only those yellow bits there were saying not confident. So we can see really, really high numbers across the board here. Very surprising in many ways. It's only been 3 years since GDPR came into force. What we've got is around 80% plus, even with the struggling marketers that are feeling very good about how they're managing data privacy. So, you know, congratulations, kudos, well done to everyone. But there's a catch, and this is where we move on to the next slide, because we were kind of interested to go back a step after we got this response. Now, we looked at how many of these very confident marketers actually don't have a single customer view and cross-index those two. So what we've got here is just over 30% of struggling marketers who are confident in their data privacy who don't actually have a single customer view. And that's interesting, because that might be marking that they're kind of overconfident. And in order to explain how and why, I'm going to go back to JC on this one.
Thanks, Anna. So for me, yes, it is very misplaced, the confidence that a lot of marketers have in data privacy at the moment. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the struggling marketers and the bottom tier marketers, they probably have a lot of silos which are within their actual company. So you might have different teams that are trying to action and push campaigns towards the same clients that you may have in different silos. So where you see that the overachiever, 10% of them, of the marketers, have a lack in a single customer view, the vast majority of them won't have that single customer view, and included in that is the consent that you have with single customer view. So if you don't have consent to actually action towards your clients for certain areas like social or anything like that, but you have them in different silos, what you may be doing is impacting those clients 2 times, which gives them the overview that they don't know who you are. And they don't really have the single customer view. So I think it's very misplaced, the data privacy that a lot of companies have, just purely because they're not looking at a central repository of data. So they can't see that all in one shot.
So arguably, in many ways, that single customer view, it's got to be like a single consent view at the same time.
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, if you don't have consent from the client, then you're not able to read their data anyway. So what is the point of having a single customer view if you don't have their consent? So you have to push that forward to try and get the consent from people so that you can then have that single customer view going forward.
100%. I think it's going to be, for me, this is the kind of next phase of conversation about how we're dealing with data privacy. I think the last couple of years with GDPR coming in, the initial panic was about how do we collect consent and making sure that we were getting that right. And I think the growth of things like consent management platforms is really testament to that. But now marketers really need to think about what happens after you've got it. And I think that's the unanswered question for a lot of people. So I'm sure we'll see loads about that next year. But let's move it on. As far as, you know, the law is a really fun thing to talk about. We're going to move to our last section, all about data-driven marketing, and that is insight. So in other words, now that we have all of this data, what are we going to do with it? And what can we learn from it? So there are some pretty obvious questions here, but, you know, they needed to be asked. First of all, to what degree do our marketers have access to data science expertise? So I don't know about you, but I'm a marketer that comes from an arts degree background, so I don't exactly know SQL. And there is obviously a huge transition taking place right now in how data-fluent marketing functions are as a whole, but by and large, marketers need to find specific data science expertise in order to make things work. And what we were seeing here is that actually that level of access is not that bad, but it does correlate to success generally. So those kind of blocks that are in blue that you can see up top is where there is greater access. And at the bottom end of the scale, we can see that that's where the guys really struggle. But I think there's a particularly interesting angle on this as to how much do you really need it? You know, it's something that is a default of now that we have this data, we need someone who's a specialist who's going to be able to unpick it for us. But that's not necessarily perhaps the way things need to be. And again, I'm going to hand to JC to talk about that more.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right in this sense. I think if you see the top 1% and that they do, a large majority of them do have access to data scientists, but it's to do with the tech stack that you've got as well. So a CDP can actually help you. Once you're doing the data orchestration, you're matching IDs and you're matching all the data from the data layer that's actually coming into your systems, you're actually organizing this data and actually giving results and insights into what you actually need to do with the clients that are coming into your website, app, or whatever the actual data sources are that you're actually collecting them from. So essentially, if you have a well put together tech stack, including a CDP, which might have algorithms in there, which will help you organize that data and actually give you more insights, then the need for data scientists becomes less. Now, I'm not saying that data scientists is a completely something that we need to get rid of once we have a CDP. No, but they can actually be better, more efficient in what they're doing in certain areas of the company rather than having a large amount of work to do. The other thing that you've got is obviously if you do have data scientist teams that are looking into insights and analyzing the data that they've got in there, that takes time. Okay. Now, a CDP and an algorithm within the CDP will do that for you instantly, will give you the right segments to push out so that they're actionable with the clients that you're actually trying to get to. So the CDP is actually helping you get more data. It's helping you actually organize that data, and it's actually helping your data scientist teams because they don't have to do the more mundane stuff that they've got. They can do the more interesting stuff that might give them more efficient campaigns going forward. But generally, I think companies that will have CDPs and algorithms and machine learning algorithms within their platforms are more equipped to actually get better results once they're actually throwing the campaigns out.
And it's funny you should mention that because that's exactly what we asked them next about whether adoption of machine learning. And so, you know, this kind of idea of being able to automate a lot of that stuff that we previously relied on data scientists to do manually is correlated to success. And surprise, surprise, yes. So, you know, that green line there, once again, is representing success correlated against, are you using any machine learning with customer data? And so we can see at the bottom end of the scale, that's largely a no. At the top end of the scale, it's overwhelmingly a yes, just like that pattern that we saw with single customer views, like that pattern that we saw with CDP adoption as well. So we can see which way this is trending, and that's not surprising in many ways. In order to achieve that kind of scale and speed of activity, when it comes to doing personalization across multiple different channels as a key marketing use case, it's an inevitability that you have to engage machine learning at some point or to some level. But that's why we asked the next question, which was, okay, if you're using machine learning, what are you doing with it? And this is where things are perhaps a little bit murkier. So, attribution, a classic marketing use case for ML, was probably highest on the scale. And then delivering NBX, so, next best offer, next best action, again, pretty high on the scale. But then it was image recognition, and then which kind of comes out of nowhere, even though natural language processing is down there at the other end. And so what we took away from this was there was not too many clear patterns in how marketers are actually using machine learning, which shows how early on we are in scoping out what this road looks like for machine learning in marketing. Over the course of the next couple of years, we're likely to see a lot of testing and learning until that pathway becomes better trodden. And then there will be probably a clearer set of steps for that marketer who is embarking on this machine learning journey to take. But right now, there isn't, which is in many ways kind of exciting. But what we can take away from the overall trend is that some machine learning is better than nothing. So once you have that single customer view in place as your foundation, this is really the next thing to start exploring. So those were our kind of key sections there. And I think that moves us on to the final verdict, so to speak, which is kind of our future gazing bit in many ways. So I think the next thing that we asked was all about optimism. So how confident are marketers feeling about the effectiveness of their customer data strategy? And, overall, pretty good was the answer. So green is super confident, but that kind of light blue is somewhat confident. It's only when we get into the dark blue and black that we're seeing people who are not confident at all. And that's in a clear minority there. So I think what we're seeing, once again, is there's a lot of drive as we get out of what's been a very challenging couple of years across the board to get back on track when it comes to these ambitious data projects. And there's no better example of that than everyone aiming to get a single customer view in place by the end of next year. You got to be feeling pretty confident if you're going to go from 0 to 60 in 12 months. Good luck to you. I think it's great. So that's our kind of level of optimism that we're seeing here. But of course, we couldn't leave it on that. We had to ask them, what are the challenges? So, the last question we asked was, what are those challenges that you're seeing in terms of using your customer data? And the responses there, many different answers, but insights kind of came out on top, and then data kind of being limited in how it could support marketing was a close second. And JC, I'm going to turn it over to you one last time to elaborate on this.
Sure. And I mean, having enough data doesn't always mean that you're ahead of the game. Okay, so you can have all the data in the world, and as I was saying before, if you're not organizing that data in the correct way and structuring it in the correct way and actually linking all the ideas that you've got within that data, then you're not going to have a good output of campaigns in that. So when we look at this graph, I think there is a little bit of optimism in here, especially when you're looking at, for example, the moderate marketers or the struggling marketers or the bottom tier marketers. They seem to think that they are getting everything that they can out of data, but they're really not, because obviously all their data is sitting in silos, which means that they're impacting different people in different ways, and it might not be the right way to do it. So for me, it's not always about how much data you have, it's how you're using that data and how you're organizing that data, and that has a direct correlation on how your campaigns actually work at the end. So for me, the main challenges that marketers have at the moment is having that data available for them, having the right data available for them at the right time so that they can then impact that data correctly.
100%. I think we are very much in a time now where nobody's going to die for lack of data. We are very much drowning in it to a certain extent. It's just being able to make sure that we can harness that to our own purposes. But it looks like next year is going to be a very exciting one with a huge amount of progress in that direction. So that leads me to our last little bits of conclusions for today. So if you take away anything from the last half hour, I hope this is what it is. Number one, nearly everybody planning to achieve a single view of the customer by the end of next year. So if you are not among that number, I would highly reconsider your decisions and perhaps look at making sure that you are not outstripped by your competition by this time next year. Point number two, CDP is becoming a barometer for success. If you need a single customer view, you generally need a CDP in order to get one. So that kind of tracks. Thirdly, preparation for the cookieless future is also a really big success indicator. If at the moment you are just looking at one solution in order to solve that problem for you, once again, reconsider. The most successful marketers are the ones who are testing out several different solutions and planning to use several different solutions in order to solve that issue for the end of 2023. Number four, marketers are pretty confident about data privacy, but not all of them should be. So if you're feeling very confident, that's great for you, but I would probably consider getting a second opinion, probably from your DPO, in order to make sure that confidence is not misplaced. And fifth, machine learning in marketing, now that this single customer view is going to be in place a lot more widespread next year, will really hit its stride because it will have a foundation of data that it can actually use with all of the models that can be created with it. And that's it, I think. Thanks very much. Zulai, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah and JC, for spilling your data secrets. Super interesting. So we're actually going to send you a link to our complete Data Secrets of Successful Marketers research white paper, which was just recently launched. So you can do a deeper dive into the data, find more trends and insight, and share the report if you find it interesting. So now I think we've reached the point where we can ask a few questions. So we have a few minutes left here to go over some of them. First one. My company is currently looking into transitioning to a CDP, but with so many in the market, it's hard to narrow down our options. What are the top 3 attributes we should check off our list before committing to any one platform?
JC, you take that one.
I'll pick this up. So I think there's more than 3 things that you have to take into account when you're actually choosing a CDP. The first thing is you have to take into account your tech stack. So any CDP that you bring on board has to have the right integrations for you as a company to be able to onboard data. You also have to have a CDP that is that can work with other CMP platforms, so consent management platforms. If you're not pulling in your consent in the correct way, then you're not going to be able to use that data, and then that data will sit in your CDP without you being able to do anything. And I think the third option there is how you onboard the data is very important. So whether we have an integration which can onboard directly from your current DMP or a data warehouse, or wherever you actually have your data sitting, you need to have a CDP that can easily onboard that data and do that in an efficient way for you as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you, JC. Next question. We currently use a DMP. How easy is it to transfer everything from our DMP into a CDP?
I know, I'll pick this up again.
Yeah, off you go, off you go.
So, obviously, it all depends on the DMP that you're using, but usually DMPs have good JSON and API connectors so that we can actually pull data direct from there. The other way of actually doing that, which will be quite an easy way to transition it all, is actually downloading all that data into a CSV file, comma separated file. And for example, in the Zeotap platform, we can upload that directly and actually pull the right data points from that file so that you can use them within the audiences and the segments that you create. So it's not a difficult process to turn over to a CDP, but you do have to take into account that there is probably a 2 to 3 month period where you're going to be doing some configurations to be able to do that. Yeah, but I mean, generally, if the DMP has an API connection, we can connect directly. If not, you can always download the data into a file and we can always upload it within our system in an easy way.
Sounds easy. Very good. All right, our next question. In addition to having a single customer view, what else should I keep into account to make sure my marketing strategy is as compliant as it can be?
Sounds like a fun one. I mean, I can give my 2 cents on this one. I guess based on personal experience as much as anything else. I think the key challenge when it comes to marketing compliance, aside from you know, what we talked about before when it comes to a single consent view, is to be able to take action at speed and scale, which is what you need as a marketer, but also to balance that out against making sure that your DPO gets to check all of the boxes on this sort of stuff. So I think the first kind of bridge to cross is to make sure that you have a really manageable and slick system of working with your DPO so that they get a level of oversight that they need, but in a way that doesn't slow you down. So I think one of the easiest ways to do that is if you have it, like those processes built into whatever marketing automation or CDP that you're using, so that your DPO can set the rules, and then you can simply follow them rather than continually having to look over things, continually having to approve things, which can slow you down. So your DPO needs to be heavily involved, but you need to make sure that there is a way to do that that can be relatively automated so that it doesn't slow down what you're trying to achieve. That would be my contribution on that one.
I think that what's important as well, Hannah, there is depending on what your company is. If it's an international company, then you have to take into account various regions and the different legislation that you have in those various regions. So to be completely consent managed across all your platform, you have to make sure that every country and every region that you're actually doing that in is what you're actually pushing out is actually within the legislation that they have there. So as well as speaking to your DPO, you have to take into account the different regions that you're working in as well.
Absolutely. Gosh, it's fun.
Fun times. All right, awesome. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up then. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you found this session useful. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to send you a link to the recording directly after this, including a link to the new white paper. Recap the session, read the report, reach out to us if you have any questions or feedback on any of the data you saw today or read in the report. We're always happy to hear from you guys. So with that said, thank you so much for joining and have a great rest of the day. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.